I was at a seminar earlier this week where we were talking about retail. Someone put their hand up and asked, I want to expand internationally, I want to maintain work-life balance and not have to work after 5 p.m, which will not be the case if I start offering my services and products in other time zones. This got me thinking, work-life balance. Is this really a thing still? Is this really a thing if you're self-employed? And I've thought about this now passively for about a week or so, and I've come to the conclusion that this is actually one of the biggest myths in current society. First of all, there is no such thing as a balance between life and work. If you were to lose your work tomorrow, would your life not be impacted? They're interconnected in so many ways, and work is such a big part of your life. Even if you're working the standard 40 hours or 36 hours or whatever that may be, that is a significant portion of your day. Say you're working 8 hours a day, there's 24 hours in a day. That's a significant portion, and I think it's sad to say that that's not part of your life, because it most definitely is. This whole concept of having work and life and balance between the two kind of leads us to separating them in an unhealthy manner, where you're calling work something and you're calling life something, as if you're not living your life when you're doing both of the two. And now, this is not to say that you shouldn't be doing things which you enjoy, that don't necessarily are productive, but that's also to say that work doesn't necessarily need to be something which you need to separate from your life, if it is something you get joy out of, if it's something that stimulates you, and if it's something that puts you ahead. I also remember this from the corporate life. There were periods, for example, when a product or a new feature was going to be launched. Someone had worked until 8 p.m. the day before, and they were like, okay, after this I need to take a vacation day because I've been working many hours. I think that this is only natural. Sometimes there will be periods of intense work and there will be periods of less work. And I think this becomes even more applicable when you're working for yourself or starting to work more for yourself. There will be some times where you have to put in a lot of effort and sometimes you have to put in less effort, and that's only natural. I don't think that should be viewed and deemed as something negative. That's part of the whole, what we call balance in and of itself, that you're doing more sometimes and you're doing less sometimes. But this whole concept that there is such a thing as work and life and balance between the two, that's universal for all of us, is flawed, deeply flawed. Again, another personal story. I was at the Swedish Tree Climbing Championship this week. Check out that vlog if you haven't. And we were talking about some of the stuff because I had brought my bags. I was also representing Arboristbutiken, which is the retail and online store that I run. And I also showed the app that I've made for arborist risk assessment. And someone asked me, how do you have time for life? I pondered upon this question because it's quite interesting. This person obviously doesn't think that what I'm doing is part of living. Or she doesn't think that building apps, working on multiple products and projects is part of living. She thinks that living is something else and working is something else. But we need to redefine this, because this will mean different things with different people. For instance, for me, I get a lot of stimulus and a lot of fun out of working and doing these new things. Like making a whole arborist rope bag from scratch, basically designing it, contacting the factories, evaluating the samples, reviewing the marketing strategy. That's a lot of fun. That's a project I'd pick over watching Netflix, for example, any day of the week. And of course, it can be exhausting in some ways. And just because it's exhausting doesn't mean that it's also valuable and stimulating, which I think is better for both character growth and also better for developing a prosperous and interesting life. And I'm also not here to say there's no such thing as work-life balance, grind, bro. But I'm rather here to say that this is deeply personal and it's deeply individual. And if you're someone who finds yourself being asked often, how do you have time for life? Or how are you gonna have time for life? Where you have people around you telling you, you need to relax more, or you need to spend more time in nature. Those are legitimate questions, but we are caught up in this thing where we've started to think of ourselves, if we don't want to do this, as unusual, as weird, as strange people who want to work instead of live. But what we rather should do is redefine this to a place where work and life and the balance in between the two is individualistic. If you're someone who wants to commit to your employer and saying, I want to work 40 hours a week, that's gonna be that, and that's my balance. Great, then that's perfect for you. But don't go leaving your opinions on other people saying,
oh, it's after 5 p.m. You should not be working.
You should be relaxing, you should be living, you should be spending time doing this, you should be spending time doing that. That's not a way for other people to live their life, even if that's a way you want to do. And on the other side of the spectrum, just because you're someone who wants to work a lot, you want to grind, you want to
put into hours to get ahead, bro.
That doesn't necessarily mean that other people's choice to only work a certain number of days, hours, times per week is limited too, because that's their balance. Their balance is for a certain number of hours to a particular task that they do refer to as work, and spending other time doing other things, such as watching Netflix, such as going for walks in nature, spending time with family, whatever as life. What you do have to get used to, though, if you are someone who does like to work a lot, who does like to spend a lot of time working as instead of watching Netflix, eating desserts, doing whatever, then you need to get used to that. There will be a certain level of resentment from people who do not like this and who do not want to do this. There will be people who ask you, when are you gonna have time to live? Why aren't you doing more of this? Why aren't you doing more of that? That's something you're simply gonna have to get used to. There will always be a level of resentment because these people do understand that the more productive you are, the more output you have, the more ahead you will get. And I think people to some degree understand this, that people who have committed to, this is the 40 hours on work, if they see you working 60 hours, for example, they know that you're gonna get ahead faster than them. And there's some level of resentment, I think, that they don't want to do this. They can't do this. They can't get to this particular level that you're at. And therefore, they will show you this resentment asking, how do you have time for life? I would never make that choice. I would never want to do it like you do it. And it's a little bit sad because just because you're doing it doesn't need to take away from them. They make the choice to spend more time doing other stuff, and you make the choice to spend more time doing what they refer to as work. That's not negative for them. That's not negative for you. You get to do what you want to do. They get to do what they want to do. But also, there's that little intrinsic level of competition where they do understand that you're getting ahead in so many perspectives as opposed to them. Because it's more difficult to do what you do. It's more difficult to spend more time working than it is to spend more time relaxing, for example. It is more difficult to work a 9-to-5 job, come home, rest for 2 hours, and then work for 5 more hours. That's more difficult than to half-ass a 9-to-5 job, come home, watch Netflix for the rest of them. That's much easier. And I think if you have the discipline and if you have the motivation to do so, people will always envy you. And that comes with resentment in and of itself. And then how this work-life balance looks like will also vary. For example, for some people that may be never switch off. For some people that may mean that you work for 4-week periods intensely and then a little bit less intensely. For some people that means that you will have your day laid out in a different way, and we just have to get used to the idea that this will differ for people. For example, my day is typically now, these days, wake up, go to the gym for an hour or so, get to my job or like the store that I run at 8:30, work until probably 5:30, come home, then not really do anything for 2 hours or so. Like until 7:30, I'm not super productive. I'm eating dinner, I'm chatting with friends, I'm looking at YouTube, Instagram, whatever. And then 7:30 to 10:30, that's where I'm kind of at it again. And I just find that that's a good balance for me. That's something that adds to my life. I find it stimulating, and I find it nice to get to switch my brain off for a couple of hours a day in the middle there, and then get back to it. And that doesn't mean that I don't have a life. Because that just means that those are the choices that I make for what suits the life that I want to live and what I find enjoyable. Therefore, I think we should get rid of this concept totally of work and life and the balance in between the two. This is totally individualistic. It will look different between anyone. What you choose will look like a completely different life from what someone else chooses. And I think the true balance is the ability and the allowance to be both unbalanced and imperfect in how we spend our time. And imperfect being that you're not spending your time or allocating your time in a perfect way according to someone else. This should be only in accordance to your own values and what you find enjoyable and what you need to do in order to live a meaningful and a happy life. So if you're someone who's trying to start some stuff, maybe you're working a 9-to-5, just trying to start some stuff at the side, you're working, 16 hours days, sometimes 10-hour days, sometimes 6-hour days, sometimes, but it varies. You're spending a lot of time working on your own things, and people are constantly hitting you with, yo, you need to live a more balanced life. You need some work-life balance. You need to spend more time outdoors. You need to spend more time with friends. If this is what makes you happy, and if this balance works for you, if you're feeling that this is not draining you in the long term, this is not having negative effects on how you're living your life in general, then go ahead. Don't listen to these people. You need to realize that there's going to be a level of resentment, and you also need to realize that there's going to be a difference. And this is something that I've really come to understand now in the last probably 2 years or so, because I've been on this kind of grind for 5 years, probably trying to start some own stuff on the side, having some side projects beside a job, beside studies, etc. Periods where I probably work more than the average, and I've really come to realize that this works for me. I like this, at least in this current stage of my life. And then obviously, if this works currently, you can always optimize later on, right? Don't care about these people who have resentment for you. They envy you to some degree. They know that you're getting ahead, and they know that they're not. They know that you're making harder choices and that you're more disciplined than they are, and therefore they envy you. So keep this in mind when you work those late nights, when you come home from your job to do more stuff, when you say no to this event, when you say no to doing that. Make sure that you do know that there's no such thing as universal work-life balance. What works for you will not work for someone else, and what works for someone else will not work for you. Feel free to subscribe. It's completely free of charge. It's a bargain. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.